This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 279 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's topic is travels along the LGBTQIA plus rainbow. Before we get going, I of course want to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast. So the topic today is inspired by recently chatting more with my son in particular about LGBT human rights, etc. It came up, of course, well, probably many of you have been hearing more about this lately. I happened to mention to my son that a friend was flying to Europe. He's asking, which route? And I said, I don't know, but probably through the Middle East. And immediately, because he's 12 now and quite informed and watches a lot of YouTube, he immediately launched into a tirade, a very appropriate tirade about Qatar's laws against gay relationships and their general LGBT discrimination, etc. Because he's been learning all about it recently from his soccer heroes who are speaking up about it ahead of the World Cup in Qatar later this month. So, he was telling me things like the hotels, including some of the hotels on FIFA's official recommended accommodation list, which actually refuse to provide rooms for same-sex couples and things like this. And as a 12-year-old growing up in Australia, he actually he cannot understand, he's flabbergasted that there should be any reason to discriminate against the LGBTQIA plus community. Of course, I agree with him, but he's incredulous. So in light of all this and the timing of having had a couple of good conversations about this, I thought it was just right to bring you an episode about some of the ups and downs over time and in recent years, in particular in the travel space for the LGBTQIA plus community. And so I have three really interesting guests for you who all have different aspects of this to talk about. So first up, my guest is Mark Chesnut. Mark's a travel writer in the States who's gay and been travelling for work for almost 30 years and, kind of keeping an eye on how this plays out. And he has seen many, many changes over that time.
Being an LGBTQ travel writer has been super interesting, and especially interesting since I've been a travel writer since the 1994, actually. So it's been, about 30 years almost, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's been really nice to see the progress around the world. Not absolutely everywhere, obviously, but in general, in many places around the world, it's gotten to be a more welcoming world for LGBTQ travelers. And so it's really wonderful to be able to be a journalist and to write about that and to be able to go to more places. When I first started writing in the 1990s, there were some countries that actively pursued LGBTQ tourists in a good way. Like the Netherlands was one of the first ones, for example. And so that was great, but they were really few and far between. But over the years in the 21st century, and especially since the 2010s, it's just such an accepted thing. Well, in much of the travel and tourism industry, and I think it's been really wonderful. I think it's been good for it. That also reflects the fact that LGBTQ people as citizens have more rights and more respect and more recognition in many countries, not all, of course. So it's still necessary, and I still do my best to try to help LGBTQ travelers pick ideal destinations. Because some destinations are not welcoming. And several English-speaking countries are not welcoming. But then there are destinations like Australia and United States and Mexico and Argentina and obviously, tons of countries in Europe as well and South Africa where LGBTQ citizens are respected, and that means the travelers are respected too. And so it's just great to see that. And the airline industry and the hotel industry and the cruise industry have all really stepped up their game, and they're going after us as travelers, but they're also treating their own LGBTQ employees, and better, and they're encouraging diversity. So it's really cool. It's been, in most ways, it's been a really happy thing to see the evolution of this segment of the industry.
Yeah, that's super interesting over that length, over those 3 decades, basically, to have been able to really firsthand observe, a period of quite significant change, finally, I think.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, when I first started traveling with my boyfriend, now he's my husband, but in the 90s, he was my boyfriend. And because he couldn't have been my husband yet, it wasn't legal yet in
Exactly.
the United States.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another thing that's changed for the better. But yeah, I remember we were traveling just domestically within the United States in the state of Massachusetts, and we tried to check into a hotel, and we'd reserved it ahead of time with one bed because we're a couple. And the receptionist had the hardest time accepting that. She said, "Oh, there must be some mistake in the system." She's looking at her computer and tapping away the keys. It says one bed here, but don't worry, I can give you two beds. And I said, "No, no, no, just one bed. That's fine. That's how I reserved it." She's like, "Are you sure?" And she looked so
Oh,
confused,
wow.
like I'd just given her a difficult math problem to solve.
Oh,
But
gosh.
anyway, but that really doesn't happen. That hasn't happened in years anywhere. I'm sure it could still happen in some places, but it hasn't happened in a long time.
Well, that is encouraging to hear, because I think, I imagine back in the 90s when those kind of things happen, that, it's just an undercurrent of, even if they're just confused and not
Hmm.
hostile, that's still mental load that you shouldn't have to deal with.
It's uncomfortable. Yeah, just one
Mm,
more piece of stress that you'd have to deal with when traveling. So, yeah,
mm.
I'm glad that is, to a large extent, that's gone. So that's good.
Now, you mentioned some English-speaking destinations who are still not LGBTQ friendly. So, can you tell me more about that?
Yes. Well, as you know, it's not your destination or my destination, luckily. So Australia is magnificent, and the United States is magnificent. Well, sometimes less magnificent than others, depending on political issues that I don't want to go in right now. Anyway, let's keep it around travel. But yes, What's happened, unfortunately, and this is going back, some of the former British colonies, not including Australia, South Africa, and the United States, but some of the former British colonies, especially in the Caribbean, and
Oh,
some African countries, they still have British anti-gay and anti-LGBTQ policies that England and the United Kingdom no longer have, but because they're policies from like 110 years ago. And so the British, installed those, things like laws against sodomy or laws against homosexuality or whatever it might be. And so, unfortunately, these former colonies are independent now, but for whatever reason, they haven't gotten rid of those
mm,
laws.
wow.
Some have, but a lot of them haven't. In like Jamaica, for example, and several Caribbean countries,
Mm,
several Caribbean islands. And so I think that also permeates the culture, and it can affect the overall culture in a way.
right.
If there's laws against who you are,
Mm,
that kind of doesn't really help your standing with the general population either.
hmm.
So it's unfortunate because there's obviously a lot of great English speaking countries around the globe that are worth visiting. But if you're an LGBTQ traveler, I mean, I've been to Jamaica, for example, 3 times for work, and it's a beautiful country. I had wonderful times. The people were wonderful to me. But would I choose to go there with my husband on a vacation? I don't think I would, because
Mm.
I would not feel comfortable being, on a couple's vacation at an all-inclusive resort there. So
Wow,
yeah, there's
right.
still certain things that we just need to be careful about, and do research.
Oh, that's really interesting. So try and say it your way, the Caribbean, we say down here, the Caribbean, but that region is quite a mystery to me. It seems very far away, and I don't know much about it. So yeah, so that's interesting to hear that that's still a problem in some of those countries. That interesting and also sad.
It is sad, yeah, yeah, because there's been so much progress in a lot of countries around the world, and I think in the general, I think the world is headed in the right direction.
Mm.
So I think it's just a matter of time. It's just that some countries are taking longer than others. So, and we
Hmm.
don't know how long it'll end up taking, but yeah, yeah, it requires some research.
So positive progress on the whole, as reported by Mark, and that's encouraging to hear. But of course, I still think in many places there is still room for significantly more progress. Anyway, my next guest is Oliver Jähnke, a trans man in Sweden who has recently begun interviewing queer people in many parts of the world for his YouTube channel. And I chatted to Oliver about how his approach to travel has changed over recent years.
So for me, I can like divide it into different parts of my life. So for example, when I was out, but before I started like transitioning, I could safely travel and being perceived as a girl, while it was very uncomfortable for me, I could still pass as a girl and just keep that part of myself down. And that was how I traveled for many years, because that was the only way I knew how to do it safely. And it really sucked, and it took so much energy from me. And, you know, it didn't feel true, obviously, because it wasn't true. And traveling while also not being yourself, I think it limits your experiences. Like it was like placing a fog over everything. It wasn't.
Yeah, it would limit your connections and interactions with people for a start, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You'd feel like you're kind of lying, or it's not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And having to think, like, with every new person you met, like, is it safe to tell them my correct name or my correct pronouns, or is that, would they understand? Would I have to like hold a lecture, which would be uncomfortable, but also, could it be dangerous for me? Would it put me in danger? And because I've also traveled a lot through like couch surfing and stuff like that, it's always like, okay, I'm in someone's home. I have to be safe.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. First priority, safety over, even all the rest of the important stuff. Yeah.
But now, like, I'm on testosterone, and I have my like new legal name, and my pronouns are he, him. But I know that I'm still not like 100% perceived as a guy. So now I found like it's a really, really scary time to travel, because I never know what to expect, and I'm always prepared to be questioned, and like I can't blend in as a guy, but I also don't blend in as a girl. So I know that I really, really have to think about like where I go, and where it's safe to be trans, because people will know that I'm trans. So that's also really scary. But like I said, like now I've focused on like traveling to queer communities and like meeting queer people, and I still couch surf a lot, but I always try to couch surf with local queers, which is also a really amazing experience. I've done that a few times, and so cool. And but then I know that there will be like a period in my future where I will pass as a guy, and where it will probably be safe for me to travel again just as a guy, and like, of course, not having to talk about being a trans guy, but like,
no question asked.
not just being me and being safe again. But then like I have had this like shift within me, which has been like a real grief to carry, because before I had, big plans of like how I wanted to travel, and I have traveled to quite like I never have to think about where to travel, right? I spent like 4 months traveling through Southern Africa, for example, and like experiences like that I would never change, and then I wanted to go to Iran, for example, to trek in the mountains, and that was sort of in the back of my mind. And then a few years later, so now a friend of mine told me that he was going to Iran to trek, and I was just, this grief came over me, because I know that they kill people like me in Iran, and it's like, it's not my biggest dream to go there, but it was a dream to go there, and now I have to like think of where to travel, and that sucks. And I mean, obviously
it's completely unfair.
Really is. And obviously it's so much worse living there as a queer person, or stuff like that.
Of course.
But if we're talking about like traveling experiences, that's a big grief of mine.
Absolutely makes sense. Have you had any, have you had any dangerous situations, or have you had any situations where you've kind of wished that you hadn't been there or hadn't gone, or anything like that so far? Or have you been relatively lucky?
I mean, I've been really, really lucky, and I haven't had anything really bad happening to me. And but like I said, I had to go back in the closet many times to make sure that I'm safe. And I don't know where those situations could have led if I didn't hide myself. But safety is the first priority. But
what would you? I mean, do you have any recommendations, or like for other trans people? How do you think they should be planning or thinking for their trips? You know, what do you recommend?
That is a good question, and also a happier one. So, like the thing that, like, why traveling has been so great for me as a trans person is these connections that I've been able to make and finding queer communities in countries I go. And like, so I always try to find some people online before, like on Instagram, or there are Facebook groups like for queer people in Hungary or queer people in England. I don't know, wherever you're going, there will be a Facebook group basically. So like go there and try to connect with the community before even going there. And there will be so many people who will welcome you with open arms wherever you go. And that is so cool. And then when we also, again, like these connections that you make, like it's not just meeting your friends, it's meeting your family. And it feels like you already know them when you get there. And it's just such a unique and great way of exploring a new place that I wouldn't change for the world.
It's really interesting to hear Oliver's story. It makes me think of, you know, sometimes we travel to escape things, and we can escape a lot of things by traveling. We can escape, you know, work and stress, but our own identity and how we're processing that just comes with us along the way. So it's really interesting to hear how Oliver's doing with that, and some optimism for the future as well. Now, my final guest today is my dear friend, the Barefoot Backpacker, who, when I said, please, can you tell me something about your experiences? But my week is really full and I can't even find the time to chat with you because our time zones don't work well and I had lots of work and stuff on. But they were very kind enough to record this snippet and send it over. So they've had some varied experiences when travelling over recent years, and I'm really grateful for them for being so open and honest in describing these. I'm sure you'll find it interesting too.
So let's get the details out the way first. I'm aroace and demi-boy non-binary. The former isn't really an issue in travelling. You know, being asexual and aromantic and travelling isn't really that different in many practical terms from being a solo traveller. You get hit with the same questions from people in cultures that are a little more family focused. Questions like, why isn't your wife travelling with you? Why do you not have children? That sort of thing, for instance. And while the answers are harder to explain, sometimes it's just easier to pretend. Oh, and in any case, while I've not met the right person yet, can be quite dismissive of my sexuality, especially in the subsequent conversations that happen, it is technically accurate. From a financial point of view, being aroace also means that I've got the same issue as many solo travellers do. While I don't tend to notice with hotels, it's certainly true that travelling on my own makes going on trips, excursions, etc. rather expensive, since many things that are priced per couple or, per vehicle. So unless I find random people to share with, my social anxiety doesn't like me doing that. Though, with my trip to the Aral Sea, I luckily found someone online who wanted to do the same trip at the same time. I either have to pay a lot or I just don't go at all. One other thing about travelling as an aroace is something I'll talk about shortly when I go on to talk about being an NB. See, I follow quite a few queer travel accounts on social media, especially gay couples, and aside from the great resorts for gay couples type posts, much of their content is geared towards safety, safe places to travel, places not to visit, how to stay safe in X place. And although very much I'm on the rainbow acronym, my aroaceness isn't something I ever really worry about because it's not something that's obvious. If you see me. So when I walk down the street, there's no way you can tell that I'm queer, at least not in that way. And, no one recognises the flag. So even when I wear it, no one outside the rainbow community knows what it means. Coupled with the fact that I do, grudgingly, occupy a male edition human body. And this does open up a question about ethical travel. Does that give me the privilege to visit certain difficult places for my rainbow comrades? And, as I often say, go to these places so you don't have to. Or should I avoid them out of solidarity? It's a question I'm often pondering, given my penchant for lesser visited and less popular places. However, I also have to stay true to myself, and over the last couple of years I've realised that I'm non-binary. I don't really associate with the concept of masculinity, and it doesn't feel like my home. However, the issue here is, though I don't feel like, there's, for example, any such thing as gendered clothing, except possibly the bra, and everyone wears jeans and t-shirt, society and culture do. While men in previous generations had long hair and wore skirts, for example, I always feel a little bit angsty if I go out even to the local supermarket in a skirt. I'm quite glad the pandemic made it acceptable to wear face masks. Never mind travel abroad. Maybe that day will come for me. But in the meantime, I've been slowly stretching the clothing vibe. This year I've travelled to Ireland, France and Czechia, predominantly wearing dungarees, because dungarees are cool, and pockets. And while the only people to comment have been mostly people I know, that comment has been uniformly positive. They've said I look vibrant and much more confident than when I was lurking around in shirts and trousers. I even had a lady at the Estonia tourist board come up to me and go, "I really love your style." Recently, I've also ventured more into blouses, which, to be honest, are just frilly and funky t-shirts, and I wear them as such. The one I wear most has a daisy motif, which, matches my whole brand image. So when worn with capri jean shorts, just look perfectly gender neutral. And, while slightly unusual, it doesn't feel particularly challenging. And I've been comfortable with that vibe both at home and abroad. My most recent jaunt, though, was at a recent Creator Awards ceremony from Traverse, where I turned up in a Daisy-themed midi dress and blue leggings, with also a Daisy headband and Daisy hair clips on my crocheted barefoot sandals, the most openly femme-leaning I've ever looked. While I hid myself on the way there behind a mask and a bobble hat, the way back, about a half-hour tube ride in London, I was much more open about it because I didn't feel awkward, because all of the feedback I had from the event was absolutely positive. They said I looked wonderful and vibrant. I mean, partly my openness on the way back may have been the wine. I'm not a role model. It must be said, though, that this was London, a city where I probably wasn't the most out there thing people had seen on that journey. While I am an Arrowace NB, I'm also very conscious that much of the world is sadly less open to NB experimentations. While I'm comfortable with the dungarees pretty much everywhere, that's probably going to be my limit for many countries. I wouldn't push the boundaries too much elsewhere because, regardless of who and what I am, my first loyalty is to myself and my own safety. I'm not saying I'd retreat entirely into the closet, but I'd certainly, pack less obviously femme clothing to certain places. And with regards to my hair, I'd be more likely to keep it in a ponytail rather than let it hanging free. I mean, if nothing else, I can try co-opting an aging 1970s rocker vibe. Don't know how well that would go down. Possibly. And that's the other advantage with, being male-bodied and also middle-aged. I can get away with stuff because I can just go, but that was the fashion when I was growing up.
So thank you, Barefoot Backpacker, for that extra interesting insight. I've been obviously friends for some time now, many years, probably a decade, hey? And been really interesting to watch these changes in the way that you travel. So thank you. All right, well, that is it for this episode, for episode 279 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Thanks, everyone, for your interesting contributions. I started off chatting with Mark Chesnut. You can find more about Mark and his work at markchesnut.com. The Chesnut part is Chesnut. And he has a new book out, Prepare for Departure, which is a really beautiful memoir about the last months of his mother's life and about their travels together and stuff like that. It's beautiful, as I said. Thanks also to Oliver Jähnke from Queers of the World, and just head to YouTube to find his Queers of the World channel. Lots of really interesting interviews there. And thanks also to the Barefoot Backpacker. You can find their podcast everywhere you find good podcasts, Travel Tales from Beyond the Brochure. One of my favourite podcasts, in fact. All right, don't forget you can chat with us about this topic and any thoughtful travel topic. We've got a Facebook group and a LinkedIn group. Just either head to the show notes or search for Thoughtful Travellers in either of those platforms and you should find us easily. So all of this info and more will be in the show notes for this episode. Those will be at notaballerina.com/279. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.